Her brothers had blocked the only road out. But why did a lonely cowboy come down from the mountains when he heard her scream? Leather snapped tight around Catherine's wrists as thunder shook the Miller cabin. She kicked toward the door, sending a chair skidding across the flour-covered floor, but Jedodiah dragged her back. Then, beyond the pounding rain, came a slow bootstep on the porch. Who was standing outside? "Stay with us, and tell me what you would do." By 5 a.m, the Bitterroot Valley was already carrying heat. A pale haze rested over the grass beyond the Miller place, and the creek moved slow but steady through the irrigation ditch Catherine had cleared 2 days earlier. She stood ankle-deep in the damp bank grass, one hand on the halter of a lame yearling, while the other ran carefully down its foreleg. Easy now. The animal shifted but did not pull away. Catherine found the swelling, marked it in her mind, then led the yearling back toward shade. Before breakfast, she had hauled feed, checked the ditch gate, replaced 2 staples on the west fence, and written the week's expenses in her father's ledger. The ledger still lay where Ezra Miller had always kept it, at the far end of the kitchen table. His chair remained beside the window. His tobacco jar still sat on the shelf. Catherine had moved neither. There were some absences a person learned to live around before learning to live with. Her father had died in February, after 2 hard years of coughing that seemed to take a little more of him each winter morning. Catherine had stayed through all of it. She had run the cattle, paid the feed bill, sat beside his bed, and kept the stove going when the snow covered the lower fence rails. Her brothers had not come home. Caleb sent 1 letter from Deadwood. Jedodiah sent none. Then Judge Harlan Croft read Ezra's will in Miller's Crossing. The house, 300 acres, the cattle, the equipment, the water rights. All of it went to Catherine. Caleb and Jedodiah received small cash bequests and nothing more. Judge Croft had folded the paper after reading it and looked at her over his spectacles. "Your father was clear." Catherine had nodded. Croft's fingers remained on the document. Clear papers don't always make clear consciences. She had understood. For several weeks, nothing happened. Then Catherine found the stakes. 2 fresh survey markers stood in the south pasture where no stakes belonged. One had been driven near the gentlest grade through the property. Another sat close enough to the creek to make her stop and study it twice. She pulled the second one from the ground. There were faint contractor initials stamped near its base. That evening, going through old correspondence, she found a letter that had arrived while her father was failing. Outside, investors wanted a narrow strip along the southern acreage. The offered price had seemed foolishly high. Now it looked different. Catherine folded the letter, placed it with her copy of the recorded will, drew a rough map showing the stakes, and put everything into a leather satchel. By late afternoon, her mare was saddled. Storm clouds had begun gathering against the Bitterroots. Thunder moved somewhere beyond the peaks, still distant enough to ignore. Catherine locked the cabin and carried the satchel toward the yard. Then she heard horses, 2 of them, coming hard. She stopped at the gate. Caleb rode in first. He had grown thinner, but his smile had not changed. It was the same smile he used as a boy when he had already broken something and wanted someone else blamed. Jedodiah followed, bigger than Catherine remembered, quieter too. Neither brother dismounted at first. Caleb looked at the saddled mare. "Going somewhere?" "Town." Jedodiah guided his horse sideways until it stood across the gate. Catherine looked at him. "Move." He did not. Caleb smiled again. "Not yet." The heat seemed to settle differently after that. Inside the cabin, Caleb tried politeness first. He spoke of how difficult the ranch must be for one woman, how much work there was, how Catherine might be more comfortable in Miller's Crossing. She let him finish. Then she asked, "How much are they paying you?" Caleb's smile disappeared. Jedodiah looked toward him. That was answer enough. Caleb took a folded document from his coat and placed it on the table. a quitclaim deed. Catherine read the first lines, then the next. It did not divide the ranch among the three of them. It stripped her interest entirely. There was language about a pending sale. She looked up. Who's buying? Caleb leaned back in his chair. That doesn't concern you. Catherine folded the paper once and set it down. I think Judge Croft can decide what concerns me. She reached for her satchel. Jedodiah stepped in front of the door. Catherine stopped. Get out of my way. He didn't move. She shoved him, hard. Jedodiah stumbled against the wall. Caleb caught her arm. Catherine swung free and drove him backward into the table. She nearly reached the porch. Then Jedodiah hit her from behind. The table went over beneath them. A crock shattered. Flour burst across the floor in a white cloud. Catherine fought with everything she had. For several seconds it almost worked. Then Caleb caught one wrist. Jedodiah caught the other. Two men, one exhausted woman. They dragged her down. Caleb pulled off his belt and bound her wrists. Jedodiah shoved the pen into her hand. Sign it. Catherine stared at him. No. Caleb crouched beside her. His voice lost every trace of brotherly pretense. Signing is the only reason you're still breathing. For the first time, Catherine understood what the land was worth to them. Not money, murder. Jedodiah twisted her injured shoulder. Pain tore through her before she could stop it. Her scream broke loose and filled the cabin. Outside, thunder rolled across the valley, 1/2 mile above the Miller property, beneath the dark pines. Grayson Hayes sat beside a small fire with a tin cup of coffee in his hand. The cup stopped halfway to his mouth. He heard the first scream, then the second. Grayson slowly set the coffee down and rose. For 10 years, Grayson Hayes had made a habit of keeping other people's troubles on the far side of his campfire. He broke horses when ranchers needed him, rode cattle when the wages were worth the dust. In winter, he trapped the upper creeks, and in spring he sometimes guided stock through passes that still held snow beneath the pines. Folks in Miller's Crossing knew the tall man in the worn buckskin coat, but few could claim they knew anything about him. Grayson preferred it that way, but he knew the difference between the cry of an animal and the sound he had just heard. That was human and terrified. A memory came without permission. A bunkhouse years ago. Angry voices behind a closed door. Grayson walking away because he'd told himself it wasn't his affair. The door standing open the next morning. A young rider who would never walk through it again. Grayson's jaw tightened. Not this time. He kicked dirt over the fire and moved downhill. Rain began before he reached the lower pines. His horse stayed tied beneath a cedar while Grayson continued on foot, Winchester in hand. Through the trees, he saw lamplight spilling from the Miller cabin and heard something overturn inside. Then a man's voice. Sign it. Grayson reached the porch. Through the damaged doorway, he saw Catherine on the floor. Her wrists were bound. Blood marked one corner of her mouth. Caleb held her arms while Jedodiah stood over her with the pen and deed. Grayson stepped inside. Step away from her. Both brothers turned. Caleb recovered first. This is family business. The old words struck something cold in Grayson's chest. Not anymore. Caleb reached for his revolver. He never cleared the holster. Grayson crossed the space between them, knocked his arm aside, and drove him into the overturned table. Jedodiah charged before Grayson could turn fully. The two men crashed against the wall, boots sliding through spilled flour. Jedodiah was powerful. Grayson was experienced. He let the bigger man's momentum carry him past, then brought him down hard enough to end the charge without continuing the beating. Caleb crawled toward his fallen revolver. Catherine saw him. Still bound, she swung one boot and kicked the weapon beneath the wrecked table. Grayson noticed. A moment later, Caleb was face down beside his brother, and both men were being tied with rope from a peg near the hearth. Then the cabin became strangely quiet. Rain tapped against the roof. Caleb groaned. A broken chair rocked once, twice, stopped. Catherine sat against the wall, struggling with the belt around her wrists. Her hands trembled now that she no longer needed them to fight. Grayson holstered his revolver. He approached slowly and lowered himself onto one knee. "May I?" Catherine looked at him. He was asking permission to touch the same wrists her brothers had just bound. After a moment, she nodded. Grayson cut the leather free. He did not mention the shaking. Catherine rubbed her wrists and looked toward Caleb and Jedodiah. "My brothers," I gathered. "You always enter houses that way?" "Only when the door's already broken." Something almost changed in Catherine's expression. Almost. Grayson stood and checked the weather beyond the doorway. "You need a doctor. I've got a horse above the ridge. There's a north trail that'll put us on the Miller's Crossing Road." Catherine looked toward her father's chair. Then the ruined table. Grayson extended his hand. "Come with me." Her eyes settled on his palm. All evening men had told her where she would live, what she would surrender, and what she would sign. This man offered a hand and waited. Catherine placed hers in it. His grip closed carefully around her fingers. He helped her stand. They moved quickly after that. Grayson gathered the scattered documents while Catherine found cartridges and pulled a heavy coat around her shoulders. He recovered her leather satchel and put the recorded will back inside. She was almost at the doorway when Caleb laughed. It was a weak sound, but it stopped her. "Go ahead, Catherine. Run." She turned. Caleb lifted his head from the floor. "Won't matter." Grayson said nothing. Catherine did. "What have you done?" Caleb's smile returned. "Pendleton's been buying through this valley for months. Your place is the piece he couldn't get." Arthur Pendleton. Catherine knew the name from the letter. Caleb continued, "The root needs this ground. Needs the water, too. We were supposed to make it easy. And if I didn't sign?" Caleb looked toward the clock. "Cole Harding makes it easy." Grayson's eyes narrowed. "How many men?" "Enough." "When?" The clock showed 10:30. Caleb smiled. "Midnight." Catherine looked through the doorway. Rain swept across the yard. Beyond it stood the barn her father had raised, the cattle sheds, the ditch, and the trees planted when she was young. Grayson picked up her satchel. "We leave now. If I disappear tonight, they'll say I ran." Alive beats proving a point. "This isn't a point," Catherine faced him. "If the house burns, the papers burn. If I'm gone, they tell whatever story suits them." Grayson's expression hardened. 6 men against 2 injured people is bad arithmetic. "They want me gone because gone women don't argue about deeds." For several seconds, only the rain spoke. Grayson studied her face. "You decided?" "I decided before they came." He looked toward the black ridge, then back at Catherine. Slowly, he set her satchel on the table. "Then we best stop talking." Catherine stared at him. "You're staying?" "Seems I am." A few minutes later, Grayson dampened a clean cloth and raised it toward the cut near Catherine's mouth. She flinched. His hand stopped immediately. He waited. Catherine looked into his eyes, then gave one small nod. Only then did he clean the blood away. No one said anything about it. Afterward, Catherine took her father's shotgun from above the mantel and began loading it. Grayson checked Caleb's Winchester. They stood across the ruined room from each other, 2 people who had been strangers less than an hour before. "Harding's coming from the south?" Grayson asked. "Yes." "What road?" Catherine looked toward the darkness beyond the window. After this rain, she closed the shotgun. "Only 3 roads can carry 6 horses." Grayson looked at her differently then. The grandfather clock kept ticking. Midnight was coming. Grayson crossed the room once, studying the windows, the door, the line of the porch beyond them. He pointed toward the front. "Best field of fire is here." Catherine shook her head. "Not after rain." He looked at her. She stepped to the eastern kitchen window and pushed aside what remained of the curtain. Ground drops south of the house. A rider can come halfway up before you see his shoulders. East side stays higher. Mud gets worse near the garden, so they'll swing toward the firmer ground. Grayson watched the darkness a moment, then nodded. East side, then. No argument. That small thing stayed with her. They worked fast. Catherine dragged flour sacks beneath the windows and shoved a washtub against the lower frame. Grayson moved the wood chest. Together they lifted the oak dresser from the bedroom and carried it sideways toward the rear door. Catherine took most of the weight without comment. When the dresser finally struck the wall, Grayson leaned one hand against it and caught his breath. You move like a landslide. Catherine turned slowly. He was not smiling at her. There was no cruelty in his face, only respect. When you're built like a mountain, Mr. Hayes, you learn to carry the weight of one. The corner of his mouth moved. Fair enough. He went to the porch, returned with his saddle pack, and opened it on the floor. Cartridges, a coil of cord, 2 short sticks of dynamite. Catherine raised one eyebrow. You always travel prepared to blow up a mountain? Only troublesome ones. What were you doing with those? Clearing a rockfall off an old stock trail above the ridge. She nodded, as if that explained everything. In Montana territory, sometimes it did. Grayson reached for another cartridge and winced. Catherine saw blood along his knuckles. Hold still. He looked at her. She took his hand before he could object, wrapped the cut with a clean strip torn from an old flour cloth, and tied it tight enough to hold. Grayson became very quiet. Catherine finished the knot, then noticed he was watching her. She let go. You'll still be able to shoot. That's comforting. Her own shoulder had begun to stiffen badly. Grayson noticed the way she favored it. Don't fire from that side. Catherine's eyes narrowed. He added, Didn't say don't shoot. Said use the other shoulder. She studied him another second, then turned back to the shotgun. From the floor near the hearth, Caleb laughed softly. He doesn't care about you, Catherine. Neither answered. Caleb shifted against the rope. Men like him don't stay anywhere. Catherine kept loading shells, but later, while Grayson checked the rear latch, she asked, Is that true? He glanced back. Which part? You don't stay. Rain whispered against the roof. Mostly. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Catherine sat on the edge of the overturned table and adjusted the sling Grayson had made for her arm. Why? He looked toward the dark window. For a long time, she thought he would not answer. Then he said, Years ago, I rode with some men out east. Trouble started in a bunkhouse. I knew it was turning bad. His jaw tightened. I walked away. Told myself it belonged to somebody else. Catherine said nothing. By morning, one of the younger boys was dead. The clock ticked between them. Grayson looked down at his bandaged hand. I heard trouble and decided it belonged to somebody else. Catherine understood. And tonight, his eyes lifted to hers. Tonight, I decided different. Something in the room changed. Not much, enough. Catherine looked toward her father's chair. My brothers always called this place Father's Ranch. Grayson waited. Even when I was the one keeping it running. She brushed flour from her skirt. First time somebody called it Catherine Miller's Ranch after he died. I went behind the barn and cried where nobody could see me. Because it was yours? She shook her head. Because it meant he was really gone. Grayson looked at the chair, then at her. Your father knew what he was doing. The will? No. Catherine met his eyes. Grayson said nothing more. He did not have to. She looked away first. The rain thickened. Gun oil and damp cedar filled the cabin. Their shoulders nearly touched as they laid cartridges in rows across the table. Catherine suddenly gathered the papers. The will, the purchase letter, the forced quitclaim, her notes from the south pasture. She wrapped them in oilcloth and slid the packet into a protected iron compartment beside the stove. Grayson watched. "If they take the house," she said, "they don't take the truth." At 11:35, the storm worsened. At 11:46, cattle bawled from the south pasture. At 11:51, the dog beneath the porch gave a low growl. Grayson moved to the window. Nothing. Catherine knelt, placed her palm flat against the floorboard. Waited. Grayson frowned. "What is it?" Her eyes lifted. 6. She held still another moment. "Maybe 7 horses. You can tell that from the floor? This house tells me when anything heavy crosses the south field." Then Grayson heard it too. Hooves, slow now, deliberate. The grandfather clock began to strike midnight. One deep note. Then another. Outside, horses stopped in the yard. A man's voice carried through the rain. "Caleb, Jed, bring out the deed." Catherine rose. She brought her father's shotgun to her good shoulder. Grayson looked across the dark room at her. She was ready. Outside, rain hissed through the cottonwoods and ran from the porch roof in silver sheets. 6 horses stood in the yard, maybe 7. Catherine could hear bits jingling and leather creaking whenever lightning frightened one of them. The man outside called again. "Miss Miller, we don't need to make this ugly." Cole Harding. His voice held none of Caleb's anger. That made Catherine trust it even less. She stayed behind the kitchen wall. Then right away. A pause followed. Harding almost sounded amused. "We came for a signed deed." "There isn't one." Caleb shifted against his ropes. Harding heard him. "Caleb?" Grayson raised one finger to Catherine. "Wait." Harding tried once more. "You can take money, a horse, enough provisions to get wherever you're going. I'll even give you time to pack." Catherine's fingers tightened around her father's shotgun. "This is where I'm going." "You're willing to die for dirt?" She looked toward Ezra's empty chair, then toward the floorboards she had scrubbed since childhood. "You're willing to kill for it?" Silence. Harding's answer came cold. "Move in." Boots struck the porch. Grayson waited until a man began forcing the damaged doorway. Then the Winchester cracked. The attacker stumbled backward and disappeared into the rain. Gunfire answered from the yard. Catherine dropped behind the flour sacks as wood splintered above the kitchen window. Glass fell across the floor. "East side," she called. A shadow was moving near the garden. The man had avoided the deep mud exactly as Catherine predicted and crossed toward firmer ground. She brought the shotgun to her good shoulder and fired. The figure dropped behind the fence and crawled away. Grayson worked the Winchester from the front window. Another shot tore through the wall beside Catherine. He caught her arm and pulled her down. "Stay low." Second later, Grayson shifted toward the doorway. Catherine saw movement beyond him. "Grayson!" She grabbed the back of his coat and jerked him sideways. A bullet punched through the wood where his shoulder had been. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. There was no time. Behind them came the scrape of rope. Caleb had freed one hand. He was crawling toward the revolver beneath the ruined table. Catherine crossed the room and kicked it beyond his reach. Caleb stared up at her. "You were never supposed to own this place." Catherine looked down at him. "That's the problem, isn't it?" She returned to the window. Outside, Harding changed tactics. "Ugh. Bring the coal oil." Catherine's breath caught. A rider moved through the rain carrying a can. For one heartbeat, she saw her father's chair again. The barn, the hay, 20 years of work turning to smoke. Grayson saw her face. "Catherine." She looked at him. He was already reaching for the saddle pack. The 2 sticks of dynamite lay where he had placed them earlier. He took one. Catherine understood. "Don't get foolish." Little late for that. He waited until the men gathered near the muddy wagon track, and the horses were being pulled forward for cover. Then he moved. The explosion came seconds later. The ground jumped, horses screamed and tore loose from their reins. Mud, broken boards, and smoke filled the yard. Men scattered away from the approach, and the coal oil can vanished into the confusion. The blast shook dust from the rafters. Catherine hit the floor. Grayson came down over her instinctively, shielding her from falling glass. She pushed at his shoulder. "I'm not dead yet. Planning to keep it that way." For several moments, the shooting stopped. One horse fled toward the south pasture. Another rider followed. 2 men disappeared beyond the fence. Catherine slowly raised her head. "Is it over?" Grayson looked through the broken window. No. Cole Harding was moving toward the barn. He still had a rifle, and another container of oil lay near the trough. Grayson reached for the door. Catherine caught his sleeve. "No. If that barn catches, the wind carries it straight here. Then we shoot from inside." "Can't see him from inside." He checked his revolver, then looked at her. "Cover me." The words landed differently from everything else he had said that night. He was placing his life in her hands. Grayson stepped into the rain. Harding fired from behind the trough. Grayson answered and moved toward the fence, boots sliding in mud. His next shot caught Harding along the side, but the gunman stayed upright. Harding fired again. Grayson's leg buckled. He went down hard. His revolver slid through the mud beyond his fingers. Catherine stopped breathing. Harding emerged from behind the trough. Grayson reached for the gun. Too far. Harding limped closer and raised his rifle. "Should have stayed in your mountains." Catherine looked at the shotgun. One loaded barrel. Her shoulder burned. The cabin still offered cover. The porch did not. Then she remembered a hand extended toward her on the worst floor she had ever lain upon. "Come with me." Catherine stepped through the doorway. A porch board creaked. Harding turned. She fired. The shotgun thundered across the yard. Harding fell and did not rise. Then there was nothing but rain. Smoke drifted from the barrel. Catherine waited. Only when she was certain did she lower the gun. She crossed the muddy yard and knelt beside Grayson. His face had gone pale. Still, he managed the beginning of a smile. "Good shooting." Catherine tore a strip from the bottom of her apron and pressed it around his wounded thigh. "I told you, nobody takes my home. Remind me never to argue with you." His hand closed around hers while she tied the cloth. Not hard, just enough to steady himself. Catherine did not pull away. The rain softened sometime before dawn. Gray light began spreading along the eastern ridge. Then Catherine saw movement on the county road. Riders. More of them. She reached for the shotgun. Beside her, Grayson tried to stand. "Don't," she whispered. The riders emerged slowly through the mist. One called across the pasture. "Shh." "Catherine Miller." She froze. She knew that voice. Marshal Clayton. Siren lowered the shotgun. 5 riders came through the wet morning haze. Clayton rode first, with 2 deputies behind him. Judge Harlan Croft followed in a dark coat already spotted with mud. Clayton took in the broken windows, scattered horses, wounded men, and Grayson sitting against the porch post with Catherine's apron tied around his thigh. His face tightened. "Good Lord, Catherine. It's been a long night." Croft dismounted without answering. Inside, he found Caleb and Jedodiah bound near the hearth. Catherine retrieved the oilcloth packet she had hidden beside the stove. The recorded will, Pendleton's purchase letter, the survey notes, the unsigned quitclaim deed. Croft read the papers, then looked at Catherine's bruised wrists and the ruined doorway. Caleb began talking. "That mountain man attacked us. He came in shooting and—" Croft folded the deed. "You can save the rest for a courtroom." Clayton separated the brothers and put irons on them. As Caleb was led outside, he turned toward Catherine. You'd send your own blood to prison. Catherine looked at him for a long moment. You did that before Grayson ever reached the door. Caleb had no answer. By 8 o'clock, the Miller yard was crowded with deputies, recovered horses, and 2 neighboring ranchers who had heard the shooting and explosion during the storm. Surviving members of Harding's party were taken into custody. Pendleton's correspondence went into Clayton's saddlebag along with the disputed papers. Croft stood beside Catherine at the gate. This won't be the last rich man who looks at this valley and sees numbers. Catherine rested one hand on the fence rail. Then he'll have to learn to see the fence. Croft almost smiled. The town doctor arrived before noon. Grayson's wound had missed the bone, but he was ordered to stay off the leg. Catherine's ribs were badly bruised, and her shoulder needed rest. Neither patient proved obedient. The following morning, Catherine was outside trying to reset a fence post one-handed when she heard a slow step behind her. Grayson stood there on a makeshift cane. You're supposed to be resting, she said. So are you. They stared at each other. Then Catherine handed him the hammer. That was how rebuilding began. The days afterward were quieter. Grayson hung a temporary front door. Catherine sorted nails into coffee tins. You know nails work whether they're organized or not, he said. They work better when I know where they are. 2 mornings later, Catherine noticed his nails had somehow found their way into the proper tins. She said nothing. He repaired Ezra's chair instead of replacing it. She washed the mud and dried blood from his buckskin coat and hung it beside the stove. He brushed her mare. She left coffee for him before sunrise. They ate supper across a repaired table, while evening shadows stretched across the floor. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they did not. The silence stopped feeling empty. When Catherine finally rode into Miller's Crossing, Grayson rode beside her. People stared. Catherine kept her eyes forward. Grayson did not crowd her saddle or behave as though she needed displaying or protecting. He simply matched her pace down the main street. In Croft's office, the judge confirmed what Catherine already knew. The attempted quitclaim changed nothing. The deed remained hers. So did the water rights. So did the Miller Ranch. When she stepped outside, Grayson was waiting beside the horses. Well, he asked. Still mine, he nodded. Good. That was all. A week later, before sunrise, Catherine woke to the sound of leather being pulled through a buckle. She went outside. Grayson's horse stood saddled beside the corral. His bedroll was tied behind the cantle. His pack was ready. Catherine stopped several yards away. Heading back? Grayson tightened the last strap. Cabin's been empty a while. Traps too. She looked toward the porch. Door still hangs crooked. You can fix it. I know. He turned. Catherine held his gaze. Knowing I can isn't the same as wanting to do everything alone. His hand stopped on the saddle. For 10 years, the mountains had asked nothing from him except that he survive them. Catherine asked quietly, Is that what you want? Grayson looked toward the bitter roots. Morning light touched the highest ridges. It was. Catherine heard the difference. She stepped closer. You gave me a way out that night. You didn't take it. No. A small smile touched her mouth. But you stayed anyway. She held out her hand. So now I'm asking. Grayson looked down at it. The same choice returned between them, only reversed. As what? Catherine did not look away. Start with a man who intends to be here tomorrow. A quiet laugh escaped him. Then Grayson took her hand. He remained through August. Then September. The front door was replaced properly. Windows were reglazed. Fences stood straight again. Catherine continued running the cattle, accounts, and water. Grayson began working horses and keeping the old foothill stock routes passable. Sometimes he rode into the high country. But now he came back. That mattered more than promises. By early autumn, white had begun touching the highest Bitterroot peaks. One evening, Catherine stood on the porch, watching cattle settle near the creek. Grayson came beside her and took her hand as naturally, as if he had been doing it for years. No gunfire, no blood. Nobody needed saving. A loose porch board shifted beneath Catherine's boot. She looked down, then at Grayson. She placed a hammer into his free hand. "Grab a hammer, mountain man. We've got work to do." He looked at the hammer, then at her. "Tomorrow?" Catherine's smile came slowly. "Tomorrow, too." They walked down the porch together. Behind them stood Catherine Miller's house. Beyond it, cattle moved through the evening grass. The creek carried water through the ditch, and the mountains rose dark against the autumn sky. The mountains had not changed. Grayson simply no longer needed to disappear into them. Maybe that was the quiet miracle of Catherine Miller's story. She never needed a man to tell her she was strong. She had already buried her father, carried a ranch through hard seasons, faced her own brothers, and stood her ground when leaving would have been easier. What she needed was something different. Someone who could hold out a hand without trying to take control of hers. And Grayson, after years of mistaking solitude for freedom, discovered that staying did not mean losing himself. Sometimes the bravest thing a lonely person can do is believe there might still be a place where they are wanted tomorrow. Imagine standing where Catherine stood that morning, watching someone you had come to care for saddle his horse. Would you have found the courage to ask him to stay, knowing he was free to leave? And if you were Grayson, would you have taken that offered hand? Maybe love is not always a grand promise made beneath a perfect sky. Sometimes it is a crooked door that still needs fixing. Coffee left warm before sunrise, a horse that always finds its way home, and one person quietly choosing another, again and again. Tell me in the comments, would you have stayed? And if stories of courage, healing, mystery, and unexpected love still mean something to you, you're welcome to subscribe. There are more roads ahead, and more stories waiting beyond the next ridge.